My name is Casey Williams. I'm 34 years old, and I never imagined I would be sitting in a polished lawyer's office discovering that my parents had completely written me out of their will. The leather chair felt cold as I stared at the document, realizing everything had been left to my brother, Martin. Years of supporting them financially and emotionally, all erased in black and white legal text. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. Before I tell you about the decision that changed my life that day, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to follow along on this journey of finally standing up for myself. I grew up in a middle-class family in Boston, where appearances meant everything. My parents, Eleanor and Thomas Williams, owned a small chain of specialty food stores that did moderately well. They were respected business owners in our community, always smiling in public and showcasing their perfect family. But behind closed doors, things were very different, especially in how they treated their two children. Martin was 5 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, he was the golden child. Nothing he did was ever wrong in my parents' eyes. When he brought home average grades, they celebrated as if he had won a Nobel Prize. When he showed the slightest interest in the family business, my father would beam with pride, already envisioning his son taking over the legacy. My mother prepared his favorite meals, ironed his clothes, and excused his behavior whenever he acted out. My childhood was spent living in Martin's shadow. I still remember bringing home my first straight A report card in 3rd grade, practically bursting with excitement to show my parents. Mom glanced at it briefly before saying, "That's nice, Casey. Did you see that Martin made the baseball team?" That was the pattern throughout my entire childhood. My achievements were footnotes, while Martin's most basic accomplishments were headline news. When Martin graduated high school, my parents gifted him a brand new car. It was a shiny red Ford Mustang he had been eyeing for months. I thought that when my graduation came, I would finally receive something similar. 4 years later, when I graduated at the top of my class, I received a card with a $50 gift certificate to a bookstore. When I asked about a car, my father scoffed. "We can't afford such extravagance, Casey. College tuition is expensive enough." Speaking of college, Martin received full financial support from our parents. They paid for his tuition, housing, meal plan, textbooks, and even gave him a generous monthly allowance. When he partied more than he studied and nearly flunked out his 2nd year, they hired expensive tutors to help him through. Meanwhile, I started working at 16, saving every penny I could from my education. I worked weekends at a local cafe, then evenings at the library, balancing multiple jobs while maintaining my grades. During my college application process, I applied for every scholarship I could find, knowing I would have to fund most of my education myself. When I pointed out the disparity in how they supported Martin versus me, my mother simply said, "Martin needs more help than you do. You've always been so independent and resourceful." My relationship with Martin was complicated. As children, there was always an unspoken competition he seemed to win effortlessly. As we grew older, his attitude toward me became increasingly condescending. He critiqued my clothes, my career choices, my relationships, always with the air of someone who knew better. "Banking, Casey, really? That's so boring and conventional," he would say, despite the fact that he had bounced between 3 different college majors before settling on business administration, which he never actually used. There were countless times when Martin took advantage of my good nature, like when he borrowed my car for what was supposed to be a weekend and returned it 3 weeks later with an empty tank and mysterious dents, or when he asked to stay in my apartment just for a few days after a breakup, which turned into 2 months of him eating my food and never contributing a dime toward rent or groceries. Despite all this, I continued working hard to earn my parents' approval. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, secured an excellent position at a respected asset management firm, and began climbing the corporate ladder. I hoped financial success might finally earn me the recognition I craved from my family. I bought thoughtful gifts for holidays, called regularly, and made appearances at family gatherings despite the subtle put-downs that inevitably occurred. I even tried connecting with Martin on an adult level, thinking perhaps our childhood dynamics could evolve into a more mature relationship. I invited him to professional networking events, offered career advice when he was in between jobs, and genuinely tried to celebrate his successes. But the pattern never changed. In my parents' eyes, Martin could do no wrong, and I could never quite do right. One Thanksgiving dinner, after I had just been promoted to senior analyst, I excitedly shared my news. My father nodded distractedly before turning to Martin and asking about his latest hobby, brewing beer in his garage. The conversation quickly shifted to how Martin might turn this hobby into a business, with my parents enthusiastically offering startup capital they had never once considered investing in any of my endeavors. That evening, as I drove back to my apartment, I realized I was still chasing approval I might never receive. Yet something in me couldn't give up on my family. Despite the hurt, despite the unfairness, they were still my parents and Martin was still my brother. Families were complicated, I told myself. No relationship was perfect. So I continued trying, hoping that someday things would change, that someday they would see me. Little did I know, this dynamic would continue well into my adult years, leading to the devastating revelation in that lawyer's office years later. The patterns established in childhood proved remarkably resistant to change, and the inequity I had experienced only deepened with time. After graduating with my finance degree, I quickly established myself in the financial sector, starting as an analyst at Hamilton Asset Management. I worked tirelessly to prove my worth. Nights, weekends, holidays, you name it, I was there putting in the extra hours that set me apart from my peers. My dedication paid off when I was promoted to senior analyst within 3 years, a trajectory that typically took others 5 or more years. By the time I turned 29, I had advanced to portfolio manager, overseeing millions of dollars in client assets. My reputation for shrewd investment strategies and exceptional client relationships earned me substantial bonuses and the respect of industry veterans. I had built the kind of career most finance graduates dream about, and I did it entirely on my own merit. While my professional life flourished, I maintained close ties with my family despite the ongoing favoritism. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, my parents' business suffered significantly. People cut back on specialty food items, focusing instead on essentials. Their stores, once bustling with customers willing to pay premium prices for gourmet products, grew quieter. Sales plummeted, and they struggled to keep all 3 locations open. One evening, I received a distressed call from my mother. "Casey, I hate to ask this, but we're having trouble making the mortgage payment this month. Business is so slow, and we had to use our savings to keep the stores afloat." Without hesitation, I transferred $5,000 to their account. "Don't worry about paying me back right away," I assured them. "Focus on stabilizing the business first." That initial transfer marked the beginning of what became a pattern of financial support from me to my parents. Over the next few years, I regularly contributed to their mortgage payments whenever business was slow. What started as occasional help gradually turned into an expected monthly transfer. I set up automatic payments from my account to theirs on the first of every month, ensuring their mortgage was never late. I also paid off their credit card debt twice when it reached overwhelming amounts, totaling more than $20,000. During this same period, Martin faced his own financial struggles. After leaving his 3rd job in 2 years due to personality conflicts with management, he found himself unable to pay rent for his apartment. Once again, I stepped in, covering his rent for 4 months while he searched for the right opportunity. That right opportunity seemed to take quite some time, as he remained unemployed for nearly a year, during which I continued to provide financial assistance. "It's just temporary," he assured me. "Once I get back on my feet, I'll pay you back with interest." That repayment never materialized, and eventually the loans were no longer mentioned. It became another item on the growing list of equities I chose to overlook for the sake of family harmony. The most difficult period came when both my parents experienced health issues within months of each other. My father suffered a mild heart attack, followed shortly by my mother being diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The medical bills, even with insurance, were substantial. They faced copays, deductibles, and treatments not fully covered by their policy. Without complaint, I stepped in once again. I paid for the best cardiologist for my father and ensured my mother had access to top oncologists for her treatment. When my father required specialized medication not covered by insurance, I covered the $1,000 monthly cost. When my mother needed post-surgery care, I hired a private nurse to assist her at home. Throughout these medical crises, Martin made occasional appearances at the hospital, bringing flowers or taking Instagram photos of himself looking concerned at our parents' bedsides. His actual contributions to their care were minimal. Whenever discussions about medical bills arose, he would conveniently need to take an important call or suddenly remember an urgent appointment. At one point, when I gently suggested he help with some of the expenses, he looked genuinely surprised. "But you make so much more money than I do. This is much easier for you." The fact that he had recently posted photos from his luxury vacation in Bali seemed irrelevant to him. My parents, for their part, never seemed to notice or acknowledge the disparity in our contributions. They would thank me for my help, but in the same breath, marvel at how Martin had driven 2 hours to visit them or brought takeout from their favorite restaurant. The monetary value and sacrifice involved in our respective efforts never entered the equation. All this financial assistance significantly impacted my own life. I had been saving for a down payment on a condo in Boston's desirable Back Bay neighborhood. As the funds I had earmarked for my future home were redirected to family expenses, I postponed my timeline for homeownership again and again. Instead of the spacious one-bedroom with a view of the Charles River I had my eye on, I remained in my modest rented apartment in a less prestigious area. I also scaled back on personal expenses. The European vacation I had been planning for years stayed just an item on my bucket list. I reduced my retirement contributions to free up cash flow for family emergencies. Designer clothes, fine dining, and other luxuries my salary could technically afford became occasional treats rather than regular indulgences. The strain wasn't only financial. The constant worry about my parents' health and business, combined with the frustration of watching Martin contribute so little while being praised so much, took an emotional toll. I developed insomnia, grinding my teeth at night as I worried about everyone's needs but my own. My few close friends noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the weight loss, and the way my smile no longer reached my eyes. "You can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep others warm," my best friend Tara warned me during one of our coffee dates. "Your family is taking advantage of your generosity, and it's not sustainable." I dismissed her concerns with a practiced wave of my hand. "Their family," I said, as if that single word explained and justified everything. "They'd do the same for me if I needed it." Looking back now, I wonder if I truly believed that, or if I was simply trying to convince myself. Despite all evidence to the contrary, I clung to the belief that my sacrifices would eventually be recognized and reciprocated, that my parents would one day look at me with the same pride they showed Martin, that my brother would mature into someone who appreciated my support and returned it in kind. It would take the shocking revelation in the lawyer's office to finally shatter these illusions and force me to confront the painful truth about my family dynamics. It was a crisp autumn morning when I received the call that would ultimately change everything. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly investment reports when my phone buzzed with an unknown local number. Normally, I might have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Is this Casey Williams?" The voice was professional, measured. "Yes, this is she," I replied, already shifting mental gears from work mode to whatever this call might require. "Good morning, Ms. Williams. This is Jeffrey Blackwell from Blackwell, Schneider and Associates. I am your parents' attorney. They've recently updated their will and estate plans, and there are some matters I'd like to discuss with you in person if possible." A flutter of unease passed through me. "Is everything okay? Are my parents all right?" "Yes, they're fine," he assured me. "This is just standard procedure after significant changes to estate planning documents. Would you be available to come to our office this week?" I scheduled an appointment for the following afternoon, rearranging several client meetings to make it work. Throughout the rest of the day and into the next morning, Curiosity and anxiety battled within me. Why had my parents updated their will without mentioning it? Why would their lawyer want to speak with me directly? Had they finally decided to include me in the family business in some official capacity? That last thought sparked a small flame of hope. Perhaps after all these years of proving myself in the financial world, they had recognized I could bring valuable expertise to their business. Maybe they were finally seeing me. The law offices of Blackwell, Schneider, and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass and steel building in downtown Boston. The reception area featured leather seating, abstract art, and fresh flower arrangements that likely cost more than what many people spent on groceries in a week. It screamed old money and discretion. Exactly the type of firm my parents would select to handle their affairs. After checking in with the receptionist, I waited only a few minutes before a tall man in his 50s approached, hand extended. "Ms. Williams, I'm Jeffrey Blackwell. Thank you for coming in on such short notice." He led me down a hallway to a conference room rather than a personal office, which struck me as unusual but not alarming. The room held a large mahogany table surrounded by 8 chairs, though only 2 place settings were arranged with water glasses, legal pads, and pens. The downtown skyline served as a backdrop through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Please, have a seat," Mr. Blackwell gestured toward one of the prepared spots. As I settled into the chair, I noticed a thick folder on the table in front of him. My parents' names were visible on the label. After offering me water, which I declined, Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat. "Ms. Williams, I asked you here today because your parents recently made substantial changes to their estate plans. As their attorney, I felt it was important that all parties understand the current arrangements." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. What kind of changes are we talking about? He opened the folder, removed several documents, and continued. "Your parents have decided to leave their entire estate to your brother, Martin Williams. This includes their primary residence, all business assets related to Williams Fine Foods, their investment accounts, and personal property." The words struck me like physical blows, each one landing with stunning force. I sat there, momentarily unable to speak or even think clearly. "I don't understand," I finally managed. "There must be some mistake." Mr. Blackwell's expression carried something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "I'm afraid there's no mistake, Ms. Williams. The documents are quite clear and legally binding. Your parents were of sound mind when they made these decisions." "But why would they? Did they explain their reasoning?" My voice sounded distant, as though it belonged to someone else. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "They indicated that they believe Martin requires more financial support than you do. They mentioned your successful career several times and expressed confidence in your ability to provide for yourself." The irony was so bitter I could taste it. My success, which I had hoped would finally earn their approval, was now being used as justification for cutting me out entirely. "So, because I worked hard and became self-sufficient, I'm being punished?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "I wouldn't characterize it as punishment," Mr. Blackwell replied diplomatically. "Estate planning is a personal decision, and individuals have the legal right to distribute their assets as they see fit. Even when those decisions completely disregard years of financial support provided by one of their children," I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. He looked down at his notes, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand this must be difficult to hear. Would you like a moment?" I shook my head, determined to maintain my composure in front of this stranger. "No, I'm fine. Is there anything else I need to know?" Mr. Blackwell hesitated before continuing. "There is one more thing. Your parents have named Martin as their healthcare proxy and power of attorney should they become incapacitated. Another blow. Another exclusion. Not only was I deemed unworthy of any inheritance, but I wouldn't even have a say in their medical care or financial decisions if they became unable to manage their affairs." "I see," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "And was Martin aware of these changes before today?" A flicker of something crossed the lawyer's face, confirmation enough before he even spoke. "Yes, he was consulted during the process." "So Martin had known all along, had probably encouraged it even.
And no one had thought to mention any of this to me until after the documents were signed and filed? Is there anything else, Mr. Blackwell? I asked, gathering my purse and preparing to stand. Just this, he said, sliding a business card across the table. If you have any questions about the legal aspects of the situation, please don't hesitate to contact me. I took the card automatically, though I knew I would never call. What would be the point? The decisions had been made, the documents signed. My exclusion was complete and apparently irreversible. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I felt strangely numb. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, clear realization that I had been deluding myself for years. All my efforts, all my support, all my desperate attempts to win my parents' approval had amounted to nothing. In the end, I was still the less valued child, still unworthy of even the smallest consideration.
Stepping out onto the busy sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Martin. News traveled fast, apparently. I ignored them, sliding the phone back into my pocket as I began the walk back to my office. I needed time to process what had happened, to figure out what it meant for my relationship with my family moving forward. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. With each step, something fundamental had changed inside me that day, and there would be no going back to the way things were before. After leaving the lawyer's office, I wandered the streets of Boston for hours, barely noticing where I was going. My phone continued to buzz with calls and messages from Martin, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Not yet. I needed to understand what had happened, to make sense of this betrayal before confronting him. When I finally returned to my apartment that evening, I found Martin waiting outside my door. He was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone, looking completely untroubled by the day's events. "There you are," he said, as though we were meeting for a casual lunch. "Been trying to reach you all day." "How long have you known?" I asked, bypassing any greeting. Martin had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but it passed quickly. "About the will?" "A few months. Mom and Dad wanted my input on some of the details." "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" I unlocked my door, debating whether to let him in or not. In the end, I stepped aside, deciding it was better to have this conversation in private rather than the hallway. "I figured they'd tell you when they were ready," he shrugged, following me inside. "Or that the lawyer would, which he obviously did." I set down my purse and turned to face him. "Why, Martin? Why everything to you and nothing to me?" He dropped onto my couch, making himself comfortable as if he owned the place. The casual way he spread his arms across the back of the sofa, legs splayed in front of him, only fueled my growing anger. "Look, Case, it just makes sense. You've got this fancy career making 6 figures. You've always been the independent one, right? Always so proud of doing everything on your own." His tone was patronizing, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "I'm still trying to find my footing. The business needs someone who will be fully committed, not someone who's already established elsewhere. So my success is being held against me, while your inability to hold down a job is being rewarded?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Martin's expression hardened. "That's a pretty nasty way of looking at it. Mom and Dad just recognize that you don't need their help. You've always made that abundantly clear, haven't you? Always showing off your promotions and bonuses." "Showing off?" I was trying to make them proud. The words burst out of me with an unexpected force. "Well, now you've got your chance to prove how self-sufficient you really are," he said with a smirk. "Isn't that what you've always wanted, to prove you don't need anyone?" I stared at him, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the narrative he had constructed, the way he had likely presented it to our parents. In his version, I wasn't the supportive daughter who had helped keep the family afloat during difficult times. I was the cold, career-focused daughter who valued independence above family ties, who flaunted her success to make others feel inadequate. "You know that's not true," I said quietly. "You know how much I've helped Mom and Dad financially over the years." Something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps?
but it was quickly replaced by defensiveness. They needed immediate help, and you could provide it. That's different from long-term planning. Did you encourage them to cut me out completely? I asked, needing to know just how active his role had been. Martin stood up suddenly, less comfortable with the conversation. I didn't cut you out of anything. They made their own decisions. After consulting with you, I pressed. They asked for my opinion, and I gave it, he admitted. The business needs consistency, someone who will be fully committed. You've made your choice to pursue your career elsewhere. The audacity of his reasoning left me momentarily speechless. My choice to pursue a career had been necessitated by the very fact that my parents had invested everything in Martin and nothing in me. And now that same career was being used as justification for continuing the pattern. I think you should leave, I said, moving toward the door. Martin grabbed his jacket, shaking his head as if disappointed by my reaction. You always take everything so personally, Casey. This is just practical estate planning, not some declaration about who Mom and Dad love more. I almost laughed at the transparent lie. Get out, Martin. After he left, I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, trying to process the layers of betrayal. Martin's words kept echoing in my head, his casual dismissal of years of sacrifice, his entitled assumption that everything should naturally come to him. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, determined to hear their side of the story. Perhaps there had been some misunderstanding, some explanation that would make sense of their decision. A small, hopeful part of me still wanted to believe they had valid reasons, that they weren't simply writing me off after all I had done. They were both home when I arrived, my father reading the newspaper in his recliner, my mother preparing lunch in the kitchen. Their comfortable suburban home, with its manicured lawn and tasteful decor, had always represented stability to me. Now it felt like foreign territory. Casey, what a nice surprise, my mother said when I entered, wiping her hands on a dish towel. We weren't expecting you today. I spoke with Mr. Blackwell yesterday, I said, without preamble, about the changes to your will. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. My father lowered his newspaper, exchanging a look with my mother. We were going to discuss that with you, though his tone suggested no such discussion had ever been planned. When I asked, after everything was finalized, "Oh wait, it already is." My mother sighed, coming into the living room. "Sit down, Casey. There's no need to be dramatic about this." Dramatic? You've completely written me out of your will, consulted with Martin about it, and didn't even give me the courtesy of a conversation, and I'm being dramatic for wanting an explanation? You're a successful professional, Casey, my father said, as if this explained everything. Martin needs our support more than you do. I've been supporting this family for years, I countered. Who do you think has been paying half your mortgage, covering your medical bills, helping you keep the business afloat during tough times? Another exchanged glance between them, this one harder to interpret. We appreciate your help, of course, my mother said carefully, but that was temporary assistance during difficult periods. This is about the long-term future of the family assets.
So, my contributions count for nothing? I was trying to remain calm, but the injustice of it all made my voice shake. We're proud of what you've accomplished, my father said, though his tone lacked genuine pride. You've built a life for yourself, a career that provides you with financial security. Martin hasn't had those same opportunities or advantages. Advantages. I nearly choked on the word. What advantages have I ever had that Martin didn't? He got a car at graduation. I got a gift card. He had his college fully funded. I worked multiple jobs. He's had endless second chances and financial bailouts, while I've been left to figure things out on my own. My mother's expression hardened slightly. You've always been so independent, Casey, always insisting on doing things your way. Martin understands the value of family legacy. He wants to continue what your father and I have built. The subtext was clear. Martin, despite his failings, was loyal to the family vision. I,
despite my contributions, was an outsider who had chosen a different path. "And you still expect me to continue supporting you financially?" I asked, remembering the automatic transfers set up from my account to theirs. They had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable at this, but my father recovered quickly. "We assumed you would want to help your family regardless of inheritance issues. That's what family does." The hypocrisy was staggering. Family helps family, except when it came to recognizing my contributions or including me in their future plans. As I was leaving, still reeling from the conversation, I noticed a file cabinet in their home office that was slightly ajar. Something compelled me to look inside, and what I found left me cold. There was a folder meticulously documenting every financial contribution I had made over the years, every transfer, every bill paid. Next to it was another folder containing investment documents showing how they had used some of my contributions not just for expenses, but to fund new business opportunities for Martin, opportunities that had repeatedly failed. I photographed several of these documents with my phone, hardly believing what I was seeing. They had been systematically using my financial support to invest in Martin's future while deliberately excluding me from their own estate planning. It wasn't just favoritism, it was calculated exploitation. The full weight of the betrayal crashed over me in waves. Years of memories flooded back, recontextualized by this new understanding. The times I'd skipped vacations to help them make payroll, the retirement contributions I'd reduced to cover their medical expenses, the home I still hadn't bought because so much of my savings had gone to keeping their house, their business, their lives afloat, and all while they were planning to leave me nothing, consulting with Martin behind my back, positioning him to inherit the very assets I had helped preserve. The anger that rose in me then was unlike anything I'd experienced before. A white-hot rage that burned away the last remnants of my need for their approval. By the time I reached my apartment, a new clarity had emerged from the fury. I had been operating under a delusion, believing that my sacrifices would eventually be recognized, that my parents would finally see me as equal to Martin, that my brother would mature into someone worthy of the advantages he'd been given. None of that was ever going to happen. The only person I could count on, the only person who would ever truly value my worth, was myself. It was time to act accordingly. The morning after discovering the truth about my parents' financial manipulation, I woke with an unusual sense of calm. The initial shock and anger had crystallized into something harder, more resolute. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, knowing I needed this day to reclaim control of my life. My first call was to Victoria Ramirez, a respected attorney who specialized in family law and estate matters. I had met her at a charity event the previous year and remembered being impressed by her straightforward manner. She agreed to see me that afternoon. Victoria's office was smaller and less ostentatious than Blackwell's firm, but it had an energy that immediately put me at ease. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal volumes and family photos. Victoria herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair, listened without interruption as I explained my situation. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, considering. Legally speaking, your parents are within their rights to distribute their estate however they choose, unless there is evidence of coercion or mental incapacity. I suspected as much, I said, my heart sinking even though I had expected this answer. However, she continued, the automatic transfers from your accounts to theirs are entirely within your control, as are any future financial contributions you may choose to make or withhold. So, there's nothing I can do about the will itself? Victoria shook her head. You could contest it after they pass, but such challenges rarely succeed unless there is clear evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. From what you've described, this seems like favoritism, which, while unfair, isn't illegal. What would you do if I were you? I asked. She looked at me thoughtfully. I can't tell you what decision to make about your relationship with your family. That's deeply personal. but I would advise you to protect yourself financially moving forward. Your generosity has been exploited. You're under no obligation to continue enabling that pattern. I left Victoria's office with clarity about my legal position, if not yet about what steps to take. My next stop was Daniel Park, the financial advisor who had guided me through investments since I received my first significant bonus. Daniel's reaction to my story was far less measured than Victoria's. "They did what?" he exclaimed, nearly spilling his coffee. "After all you've done?" I appreciated his outrage on my behalf. It validated my feelings in a way my family never had. I need to understand exactly what financial commitments I have with them. What can I legally and ethically disentangle myself from? Daniel pulled up my accounts. Let's see what we're dealing with. Over the next hour, we cataloged every financial connection between me and my family. The monthly transfers to my parents' account that helped cover their mortgage, the annual contributions to their property tax fund, the credit card on which I had added them as authorized users for emergencies, the automatic payments to various medical providers for my father's heart medication and my mother's follow-up cancer treatments. The total I had contributed over just the past 5 years was staggering, $278,000. Seeing it quantified made me feel physically ill. This wasn't occasional help during rough patches. This was systematic support that had allowed them to maintain their lifestyle while continuing to favor Martin in their long-term planning. "What about your own financial goals?" Daniel asked gently. "The condo you wanted to buy, your retirement planning?" I had been contributing only the minimum to my 401k instead of the maximum for years, diverting the difference to family expenses. My home purchase fund had barely grown in 5 years. The international travel I had dreamed of since college remained just that, a dream.
"I've put everything on hold," I admitted. Daniel nodded, his expression serious. "Casey, you've been an excellent financial planner for everyone except yourself. It's time to redirect that expertise where it belongs." Together, we developed a comprehensive plan. First, I would cancel all automatic transfers to my parents' accounts, effective immediately. Next, I would remove them as authorized users from my credit card. Then, I would redirect those funds to maximize my retirement contributions and accelerate my home purchase savings. For the medical expenses, which felt ethically different from the other support, we devised a transitional approach. I would continue payments for 3 more months, giving my parents time to arrange alternative coverage or payment plans. I would inform them of this timeline in writing, making the end date clear. As for Martin, any financial assistance to him would cease completely, effective immediately. No more emergency loans, no more covering his rent during temporary unemployment, no more bailing him out of his own poor decisions. The plan was practical, ethical, and protected my interests while still allowing for a compassionate transition regarding medical necessities. It was, in Daniel's words, financial self-care, not selfishness. Armed with this plan, I returned home and opened my laptop. It was time to implement these changes. I logged into my bank account and navigated to the automatic transfers section. There they were, the monthly payments that had been draining my resources for years. $1,800 to my parents' joint account on the 1st of each month, $400 to my father's pharmacy account on the 15th, $250 to my mother's oncologist on the 20th, $500 to Martin's landlord on the 3rd, a recent addition after his latest financial crisis. I stared at the screen, my cursor hovering over the cancel button for the first transfer. A lifetime of conditioning made my hand tremble slightly. I had been taught that family came first, that taking care of my parents and even my brother was my responsibility, especially since I was doing so well. Cutting these financial ties felt like violating some fundamental code. Then I remembered the folders in my parents' office, the calculated way they had documented my contributions while simultaneously planning to exclude me from their legacy. The years of taking my support for granted while elevating Martin's minimal efforts, the exploitation disguised as family obligation. I clicked cancel on the first transfer, then the next, and the next.
For the medical payments, I scheduled them to end after 3 months as planned. For everything else, the termination was immediate. Next, I called my credit card company and removed my parents as authorized users. I changed the passwords on all my financial accounts, as well as my email and phone accounts. I updated my address book with my parents' and Martin's information, moving them to a new category labeled Limited Contact. As I worked through each step of financial separation, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, certainly, conditioned by years of putting their needs first, anxiety about how they would react, but also increasingly a sense of rightness, of reclaiming what was mine, of finally establishing the boundaries that should have existed all along. When everything was done, I sat in my living room as evening fell, watching the city lights come on across the skyline. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future shaped entirely by my own desires and needs, a home of my own choosing, travel to places I had longed to see, relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and exploitation. It wouldn't be easy. Decades of family dynamics couldn't be unwound in a single afternoon. There would be confrontations, accusations, attempts to pull me back into the old patterns. But something had shifted irrevocably within me. The daughter who had desperately sought approval, who had sacrificed her own security for family harmony, who had accepted less in hopes of someday receiving more, that person was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her own worth, who recognized exploitation for what it was, and who was finally ready to put herself first. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. For the first week after canceling the transfers, I heard nothing from my family. The silence was both a relief and disquieting, like the stillness before a storm. I used the time productively, touring condos in neighborhoods I had once considered out of reach. With my newly reclaimed finances, options I had reluctantly crossed off my list were suddenly viable possibilities. I fell in love with a 10th floor unit in a converted factory building. It had exposed brick walls, 12-foot ceilings, and windows that filled the space with natural light. The view overlooked a small park rather than the flashier cityscape, but I realized I preferred watching the seasonal changes in the trees to the glitter of distant skyscrapers. It felt like a metaphor for the shift in my own priorities, from appearances to substance. After my offer was accepted, I threw myself into planning the space. Paint colors, furniture arrangements, art for the walls. I created detailed spreadsheets for moving expenses and decoration budgets, finally applying my financial expertise to my own life. In the evenings, I reconnected with friends I had neglected while catering to family demands. Tara, who had warned me for years about my family's treatment, was especially supportive, helping me shop for my new place and offering a sympathetic ear when doubts crept in. "You look different," she remarked over brunch one Sunday, about 3 weeks after my decision. "More relaxed somehow, like you've put down a heavy backpack you've been carrying for years." I realized she was right. The constant background anxiety of waiting for the next family crisis, the next financial demand, had vanished. I was sleeping better, eating better, even standing straighter. The physical toll of stress I had carried for so long was finally easing.
For the first time in memory, I felt truly present, not mentally calculating family obligations or worrying about the next crisis, just experiencing the moment fully and completely. When I returned home and turned my phone back on, it exploded with notifications. 5 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, 7 text messages of escalating urgency and accusation. 1 voicemail from Martin that began, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" before I deleted it without listening to the rest. I considered not responding at all, but decided that clear communication was better than avoidance. I sent a single message to my parents. "I will call tomorrow at 7 p.m. to discuss the changes in our financial relationship." The next evening at exactly 7, I called. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "What is going on, Casey? The mortgage payment bounced. The bank called us. It was humiliating."
No greeting, no concern for why I might have stopped the transfers, just immediate focus on their inconvenience. "I've made some changes to my financial commitments," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I will no longer be contributing to the household expenses." "What do you mean changes?" My father's voice cut in, signaling I was on speakerphone. "We were counting on that money." "Yes, you were counting on money from the daughter you've completely written out of your will," I replied, surprised by my own calm. "The daughter who apparently doesn't deserve any consideration in your estate planning, despite years of financial support?" A brief silence followed, then my mother's defensive tone. "That has nothing to do with this. The will is about the future. This is about our current needs." "It has everything to do with it," I countered. "I've been supporting this family for years while you've been planning to leave everything to Martin. I've recently learned you even used my financial contributions to invest in opportunities for him. That stops now." "We are your parents," my father said, as if that fact alone entitled them to endless support. "You can't just cut us off." "I'm not cutting you off out of spite," I explained, though part of me wondered if they deserved even this much explanation. "I'm establishing boundaries. I've continued the medical payments for 3 more months to give you time to make other arrangements. After that, you'll need to manage your finances independently, just as you've expected me to do since I was 16. "Is this about money?" my mother asked incredulously. "Are you really that materialistic, Casey, after all we've done for you?" The question was so detached from reality that I almost laughed. "This isn't about money, Mom. It's about respect. It's about recognition. It's about being treated as an equal member of this family rather than a convenient ATM." "Martin needs our help more than you do," my father interjected, falling back on the familiar refrain. "And I needed your help when I was younger," I replied. "I needed it when I was working 3 jobs to pay for college. I needed it when I was eating ramen noodles every meal to save for textbooks. I needed it when I couldn't afford a car to get to interviews. But you decided I could manage on my own then. Now you can do the same." The conversation unraveled from there. My parents cycled through anger, guilt trips, accusations of selfishness, and finally threats. "If this is how you're going to be, don't expect to be welcome in this house anymore," my father declared. "And don't come crying to us when you need something in the future," my mother added. I anticipated this reaction and prepared myself for it, yet it still hurt. Not because I feared losing their support, which had always been conditional and limited, but because it confirmed how transactional their love for me had always been. "I understand," I said simply. "I hope someday we can build a healthier relationship. Until then, I need to focus on my own well-being." After ending the call, I sat in silence for a long time, processing the finality of what had just occurred. The break wasn't just financial, it was emotional, psychological, perhaps even permanent. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, challenging a family dynamic that had been established decades ago. The next day, Martin showed up at my office, causing a scene in the reception area until I agreed to speak with him. His face was flushed with anger as he followed me into a small conference room. "What the hell are you trying to prove?" he demanded without preamble. "Mom and Dad are devastated. The bank is threatening foreclosure if they miss another payment." "That sounds like a problem for the 3 of you to solve together," I replied, maintaining my composure despite his aggression, just like the problems I had to solve on my own all these years. "This is different. They're older now. They need support." "And they have another child," I pointed out, "one who stands to inherit everything they own. Perhaps that child should step up." Martin's expression shifted, discomfort briefly replacing anger. "You know, my situation isn't stable right now. I can't afford to help them the way you can." "Then perhaps you should reconsider accepting an inheritance that comes with significant financial responsibilities. If you're not prepared to help maintain their assets now, How will you manage them after they're gone? He had no answer for that, only more accusations and guilt trips echoing our parents' tactics. When he realized I wouldn't be swayed, he resorted to threats just as they had. You'll regret this, Casey, when you've driven away the only family you have, when you're all alone with your money and your fancy career, you'll wish you had made different choices. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. The handsome, confident facade that had charmed our parents all these years now appeared brittle, hiding a profound insecurity. He had been given every advantage, every preference, every benefit of the doubt, and still he stood before me, angry that the sister he had helped exclude was no longer willing to subsidize his preferential treatment. I may be alone, Martin, but at least I'll be standing on my own 2 feet, not living off the sacrifices of others while pretending to be self-made. After he left, I received a flurry of messages and calls from extended family members and family friends, all clearly having heard a one-sided version of events. I was painted as the heartless daughter who had abandoned her aging parents, the cold career woman who valued money over family. Some messages were pleading, urging me to reconsider for the sake of family harmony. Others were accusatory, expressing disappointment in the person I had become. I responded to each one with the same carefully crafted message. Thank you for your concern. This is a private matter between me and my immediate family. I have made decisions necessary for my well-being after years of supporting my family financially while being systematically excluded from long-term family planning. I hope you can respect that there are multiple perspectives to this situation. Some responded with understanding, others with further criticism. A few simply stopped communicating altogether. I recognized that I was being tested, that these were the consequences of standing up for myself in a family system that had never valued my autonomy or equality. Through it all, I held firm to my decision, reminding myself daily that healthy boundaries were not selfish, that financial independence was not abandonment, that expecting reciprocal respect was not unreasonable. The old guilt still surfaced occasionally, but with decreasing frequency and power. One evening, about 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, my parents arrived unannounced at my apartment. They looked tired, older somehow, as if the past weeks had aged them visibly. My first instinct was concern, followed immediately by weariness. I invited them in, but remained standing, unwilling to settle into what could be a lengthy emotional manipulation.
We want to talk about what's happened, my mother began, her voice softer than during our phone call. We feel there have been misunderstandings on both sides. I'm listening, I said, neither agreeing nor disagreeing with her characterization. What followed was not the apology or recognition I might once have hoped for, but a more subtle attempt to re-establish the old dynamic. They acknowledged that perhaps they had taken my help for granted, but quickly pivoted to how difficult things had become without my support. They mentioned having to downsize their lifestyle, the embarrassment of asking friends for loans, the strain on their health. "We're not getting any younger, Casey," my father said. "Is this really how you want things to be between us?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts before responding. This was the moment where the old Casey would have caved, would have agreed to resume support in exchange for vague promises of appreciation that would never materialize. But that version of me was gone. "I want a relationship with you based on mutual respect and love, not financial transactions," I said carefully. "I want to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I want the same consideration and support that you've always given Martin." "We do value you," my mother protested. "We've always been proud of your independence." "Independence shouldn't mean exclusion," I countered, "and pride shouldn't be conditional on what I can do for you." We talked for another hour, circling the same points without real resolution. They could not or would not
acknowledge the fundamental inequity in how they had treated their children, nor could they accept that my financial support was no longer available without significant changes in our relationship dynamic. In the end, they left with the situation unresolved, the future of our relationship uncertain. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a profound mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the parents I had wished for all my life, but never truly had. Relief that I was finally free of the cycle of giving without receiving, of loving without being fully loved in return. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done what was necessary, not just for my financial well-being, but for my emotional and psychological health as well. The road ahead might be lonely at times, but it was mine to walk on my own terms. The first months after establishing boundaries with my family were the hardest. Despite knowing I had made the right decision, there were nights I lay awake replaying conversations in my mind, questioning whether I had been too harsh, too absolute in my stance. Old habits of guilt and self-doubt surfaced regularly, particularly during holidays and family birthdays that I now spent alone or with friends, rather than relatives. The anger I had initially felt provided a certain clarity and strength, but as it gradually subsided, more complicated emotions took its place. Grief for the family relationships I had always wanted but never truly had. Confusion about my identity outside the role of family supporter and peacekeeper. Fear that perhaps Martin was right, that I would end up alone with nothing but my career and bank account for company. Recognizing that I needed help processing these feelings, I began seeing Dr. Elaine Watson, a therapist specializing in family dynamics and boundary setting. Our weekly sessions became an anchor, a safe space to examine the patterns that had shaped my life and to develop healthier ways of relating to myself and others. What you're experiencing is a form of grief, Dr. Watson explained during one particularly difficult session. You're mourning the loss of the family you thought you had or hoped you could have. That's a legitimate loss, even if the relationships weren't serving you well. She helped me understand that my family had operated as a system, with rigid roles assigned to each member. Martin was the golden child, perpetually in need, perpetually forgiven. I was the responsible one, the provider, the emotional shock absorber. Our parents were the arbiters, maintaining this dynamic through differential treatment disguised as responding to our different needs. Systems resist change, she told me. When you stepped out of your assigned role by withdrawing financial support and demanding equal consideration, the entire system was threatened. The pressure you're feeling to return to the old patterns is the system trying to reestablish equilibrium. Understanding the mechanics of family dynamics helped intellectually, but the emotional work was harder. I had to unlearn the belief that my value was tied to what I could do for others. I had to recognize that the constant drive to earn approval through achievement and sacrifice was a response to conditional love, not a healthy expression of caring. Most challenging of all, I had to confront the possibility that my parents might never change, might never offer the recognition and equal treatment I had spent a lifetime seeking. Acceptance of this reality, Dr. Watson assured me, wasn't giving up. It was freeing myself to build a life based on current truths rather than perpetual hope for change. As the initial emotional turbulence began to settle, I turned my focus to rebuilding other aspects of my life. My new condo became a project of self-expression. Each color choice and furniture piece selected purely for my own pleasure rather than to impress others or meet external expectations. I filled the space with books I'd always wanted to read, art that spoke to me personally, plants that made the air feel fresher and more alive. Professionally, I found new enthusiasm for my work once it was no longer serving as a financial pipeline to my family. I took on challenging projects I had previously avoided due to time constraints, mentored younger colleagues, and even began considering opportunities for advancement that would have been impossible while juggling family crises. 6 months after moving into my new place, I took my first real vacation in years, a 2-week trip to Portugal that I had dreamed about since college. Walking alone along the cliffs of the Algarve, watching fishing boats in the harbor of Porto, sitting in quiet cafes in Lisbon with only my thoughts and a journal for company. I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been submerged by family obligations. I realized I enjoyed solitude, something I had rarely experienced with the constant demands on my attention and resources. I found pleasure in small personal indulgences, a perfectly prepared coffee, a book read uninterrupted from cover to cover, an afternoon nap with no alarm to wake me up. Most importantly, I discovered that I could be content in my own company, that the fear of ending up alone, which had been wielded as a threat, was actually a promise of peace. The distance from my family also allowed me to build deeper, more authentic relationships with others without constantly rushing to address family emergencies or manage family dynamics. I had time and emotional energy for friendships based on mutual care rather than obligation. Tara and I became even closer, our friendship evolving from occasional brunches to regular parts of each other's lives. I reconnected with college friends I had drifted away from, finding that many of them had experienced similar family challenges. I even began cautiously dating again, approaching romantic relationships with a new awareness of healthy versus unhealthy patterns. My improved sense of self-worth made me less likely to accept poor treatment or one-sided dynamics, more able to communicate my needs clearly, and more willing to walk away from connections that didn't serve my well-being. As for my family, the situation evolved in ways I could not have predicted. After several months of silence following our last confrontation, Martin reached out with an unexpected message. The family business was struggling without my financial support, and he had been forced to take a more active role in its management. For the first time in his life, he was working regular hours, dealing with practical realities like payroll and inventory, facing consequences for missed deadlines and poor decisions. "I never realized how much you were doing behind the scenes," he admitted during a tentative coffee meeting, "and how much Mom and Dad were struggling before you stepped in." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, the first I had received from any family member, that my contributions had been significant and unrecognized.